the Clinton St. Patrick's Parade, careering a winning reach with the Irish medley.
On March 13, 2015, the largest St. Patrick's Day parade in Clinton took place. There, thousands of sons and daughters marched on Main Street in town to celebrate their Irish heritage and to remember their ancestors. In part, they wanted to remember the Mulligan families, the sole representatives of the Irish immigrant spirit in Clinton and in America as a whole. In the second wave of Irish immigration to America, the Mulligans came to the New World in search of a better life. After generations of struggling in Clinton, the Mulligan families introduced brave pioneers like Uncle Francis Mulligan, a man who paved the way for his fellow countrymen to follow. Later, Michael C. Mulligan, the second generation of the Mulligan family, became a well-known businessman in Clinton. His brother Bernard Mulligan and son Michael J. Mulligan became celebrated priests in Camden, New Jersey. This is the story of the Mulligan families, a story of passion and faith, a story of hardships and joy. The first Mulligan family to set foot in the New World was Francis Mulligan. In 1837, at the age of 19, he arrived in New York. Like his fellow Irishmen, he began to look for a job as soon as his ship docked. He first went to Monmouth County, then to Trenton, and then to Rocky Falls, Pennsylvania. After 3 years, in August of 1840, he discovered the town of Clinton, where he found a job and learned lime burning. There, Francis reunited with his younger brother Patrick, who was fresh off the boat from Ireland.
When we look back, it seems Frank made a good decision when he came to Clinton for a fresh start. The time period was during the Industrial Revolution, and many young people were going into the cities to work in the factories for the good pay. In this county, though, the agricultural-based economy, it needed any young man who was strong enough and hardworking to work out in the fields.
Francis seemed very persistent to learn things and to understand the importance of owning a business and property. On December 10, 1845, 15 days before Christmas, he spent $100 cash to buy lot number 28 on Halstead Street, near the town boundary. There, he built a 3-apartment house for himself, his younger brother Patrick, and his older brother Terence, who had recently arrived with his wife and family.
This was not free housing for Frank's 2 brothers. Each had to pay $100 for ownership. Right away, Francis doubled his profit, and I think that shows he had a good mind for business.
Frank's shrewd business skills were put to a true test. When a business opportunity came 3 years later in 1848, the quarry, which used to be part of the mill, had now become an entirely separate entity and was put on the market for sale. Frank and his brother Patrick successfully won the bid. They purchased the quarry with a down payment of $100 and a $500 mortgage. Before this purchase, Frank had already started to acquire business properties. A year before, he bought a small piece of land which was adjacent to his current quarry site. That year, he had also made a purchase of a 1/4-acre parcel from the Cox family for $150.
The piece of land Frank purchased from the Cox family, he later went on to sell to the new neighboring miller, John F. Steiger, for the price of $450. He made a profit of around $300, which is pretty handsome for that time period.
Frank and his brother closed all the deals of the ownership transactions and started up their business. 1848 was a good year for the Mulligans. After roughly 9 years in the United States, Frank finally received his citizenship. His wife Margaret was about to deliver their second child after giving birth to their daughter Ellen a year prior. Also, as Frank's older brother Terence joined the business operation, his younger brother Patrick began to prosper as his partner. Patrick received his citizenship and married Sarah White, an Irish girl who had arrived in Clinton about a year earlier. As Frank, Patrick, and Terence struggled in the New World, there was also another brother, a 45-year-old married man, James Mulligan, his wife Catherine, and 5 children, Patrick, James, Bridget, Michael, and Bernard. They remained in Ireland waiting for the right opportunity to join their family. In 1848, James Mulligan finally boarded the ship Monteo. On July 5th, after a long voyage, he arrived in New York Harbor from Liverpool. On January 9, 1850, his wife and his 5 children boarded the ship Sheridan and arrived in New York Harbor.
It was like a family reunion. Keep in mind that from the time Frank came to the country in 1837 to the time when his oldest brother came, he had been gone for 9 years. It was in fact a long journey.
James Mulligan's wife and 5 children were not able to come with him to the United States. They had to wait another 2 years. That was probably because James needed to work with his family in order to make enough money to send for them. He needed to rent a house in Clinton for them to continue their lives.
In the years of the famine, between 1820 and 1860, Ireland eventually sent millions of men, women, and children to the United States to escape starvation. With the background of these unskilled peasants, very few were as lucky as the Mulligan families. In many cases in New Jersey, those who ended up working in industrial cities such as Paterson, Newark, or Jersey City often had little choice and took on undesirable and dangerous jobs. These jobs had fewer pay, were often avoided by those who considered themselves Native Americans. On top of this, the Irish still found themselves in a heated competition for jobs. When times were hard, searching for work may have taken them across the state to canal and railroad construction sites. To those Irish immigrants, owning a business and house to live in like the Mulligans was simply a dream. Living in an immigrant district in Jersey City or Trenton, they often would have to share subdivided homes or apartments. There, it was not only crowded and noisy, but lacked adequate sewage and running water.
Poor living conditions were truly a direct result of the low wages paid to the Irish immigrants. These unskilled immigrant families commonly relied on earnings from other household members, usually the women and children, but unfortunately the opportunities were few and the wages were low.
The Irish immigrants in the 19th century often dealt with violence, disease, fire hazards, unsanitary conditions, and alcoholism. When Irish families moved into neighborhoods, other families often moved out. However, the Mulligan families in Clinton seemed to be treated with reasonable respect compared to those who lived in the industrial cities. The local Protestants in Clinton despised those Irish families who lived on Halsted Street across the river. They objected to their culture, social stature, and their Roman Catholic beliefs. They were disgusted to see how many worked for the Mulligan quarry as the hired hands who lived on Mulligan's properties. Overall, the anti-Irish sentiment in Clinton was considerably mellow.
But the tension was there. The tension between the local colonial Protestants versus the Irish immigrants was about rich versus poor, was about local colonial culture versus Irish culture, was about Christian beliefs versus Roman Catholic beliefs. Today, as Americans, we value pluralism, but back then, America didn't want or value pluralism. They looked at the immigrants as a threat to their freedom and to the meaning of the American Revolution.
By the time the Mulligans' oldest brother, James Mulligan, his wife, and 5 children came to Clinton, his 3 brothers had not only succeeded in the quarry business enough to afford a good standard of living, but also enough to create jobs for their extended families and other Irish immigrants.
James Mulligan arrived in the United States in 1848 from County Cavan in Ireland and went to work for his 3 brothers in their quarry. The money he gained from his job he used to bring his wife and children to the United States.
The quarry business employed a lot of men from James' wife's side of the family. Interestingly, his wife's side of the family was also named Mulligan, so both Catherine's brother and her eldest son were named Patrick. Because of this, there were many James Mulligans, Michael Mulligans, and Bernard Mulligans in Clinton.
During the mid-1800s, many other Irish immigrants also settled on Halsted Street. It became known as Irishtown, and had been growing into a relatively sizable Irish immigrant community. Other families who immigrated from Ireland to Clinton included the Gooleys, the Kinneys, the McGrans, the McLaughlins, and many others.
The size of the Irish immigration would have been larger if it was not for the Jersey Central Railroad, which changed its plan by relocating its station in Beaverbrook. The reason was possibly to do with the making of the area of the town of Clinton in 1865. Once the station was completed, it was named Clinton Station, but was not actually located in Clinton.
To meet the Irish immigrants' religious demands, the Mulligans supported a small church, the Clinton parish of St. Mary's on Halsted Street. When the church was erected, Father C.A. Rowland was appointed pastor to conduct Mass. Later in 1865, he was succeeded by Father Patrick Leonard. None of it would have been possible without the Mulligan family's mighty efforts.
The Mulligans and the Irish were Catholic. They taught their children the tenets of the Catholic faith and required them to learn catechism. There was an incident one Sunday when the Presbyterian minister came across the street to their house on Center Street. And he said to Michael, "Why don't you bring the children to the service? It won't do them any harm." And Michael replied, "It won't do them any good either."
To the Irish, there was no more important voice than that of the Catholic priest. And to illustrate that fact, there was a story from the early 1850s where some local Irish immigrants that worked at one of the railroad stations, they were having a bit of a payday celebration right here at the Clinton house. They were having so much fun, and it got a little too rowdy at the point where the sheriff was called in. The sheriff actually had to reach out to the local militia to calm things down. And what happened was when the militia actually showed up and they saw this rough and tumble crew of Irishmen, who were at that point, they were in no mood to back down from a fight, one of the militiamen wisely called out to the local priest. Father Reardon got the call, quickly came down, and was able to defuse the situation.
In Clinton, the Mulligans continuously remained as a center of the Irish community development. The great story began when Frank, Patrick, and Terence in 1855 made the abrupt decision to sell their entire properties to well-to-do local merchant James P. Huffman.
No one really knows the reason why they sold the quarry business and the other properties that they built, which became the center for the Irish community in Clinton. Also, the interesting thing is that the three brothers didn't sell the quarry business to their older brother, James. Perhaps he didn't have enough money, or there could have been other issues in the family. Whatever the reason, James still found himself in a vastly different situation.
A few months after Mr. Huffman resold the same quarry he had bought from the Mulligans, it landed into the hands of George Gulick, another fairly well-to-do local. Somehow, James Mulligan got a deal to lease the quarry business from George Gulick. James didn't own the property of the quarry like his brothers had, but he now instead owned the quarry business. He had taken up where his brothers had left off in 1855. He hired both his brother-in-laws, William Mulligan and Pat Mulligan, as laborers. Soon his nephews, Michael, Bernard, and James, became hired hands as well. The quarry business became operational.
James' wife, Catherine, and her two brothers, William and Patrick Mulligan, who worked for James, came from Ireland a bit earlier than Catherine. William came on June 29, 1850, about 6 months before his sister. Patrick came in 1853. It was possible that her two brothers helped her to get a ticket.
James did well while he owned the quarry. He sold both stone and burnt lime. In payment, he received everything from livestock to liquor. He was finally able to purchase a home for himself on Halsted Street in 1857, 2 years after he took over the business. Under his ownership, he not only hired his 3 sons, James, Michael, and Bernard, but also paid a $350 mortgage. In 1859, he paid another sum of $200 for business purposes. He also may have possibly paid for the marriage of his daughter Bridget to Thomas McGinnis.
There's some speculation that James and Catherine disapproved of Bridget's marriage. They felt that Bridget had married beneath her, and Thomas was illiterate, and the younger Mulligan boys had attended school in Clinton, and Bridget herself was educated enough to read and write. James's family was determined to better themselves with each passing generation, and Bridget's marriage was out of sync with those family aspirations.
Bridget and Thomas McGinnis married sometime in 1858 or 1859. Together, they would raise a family of 11 children. Years later, in 1863, they purchased property once owned by Bridget's 3 uncles, Frank, Patrick, and Terence, and lived there for about another 11 years. All of this happened after James Mulligan's death on June 16, 1862, at age 57. After James' death, the quarry business and other estates were passed on to his sons, Patrick, James, Michael, and Bernard. Specifically, James gave Michael and Bernard a large portion of the quarry business and the responsibility of looking after their mother for the rest of her life. It was very clear that James was counting on these 2 to carry on the family legacy.
When you look at how James distributed his belongings to his children, it was really quite common for the time. The difference between his daughter Bridget and her 4 brothers was particularly large. She received $50 in cash, while the sons were left with hundreds of dollars plus the business.
Michael took over the business and proved he had a plan. He built a small empire for himself and his family, far greater than the success of the Mulligans who worked the quarry before him.
It came down to who was the most capable of running a business. Frank Mulligan led the family business despite being one of the younger brothers. Now it was Michael and Bernard, who the family called the babies, to become the backbone of the business. It was proven that James was correct and had no regrets.
Michael was born in 1846 in Ireland. When his mother Catherine brought him and the rest of his siblings to the United States, he was barely 4 years old. He was raised on Halsted Street and attended school in Clinton. Throughout his childhood, he was described as a large, dark, and serious kid with a stern face and no smile. It might be possible that he carried the shame of growing up on Halsted Street throughout his life, which motivated his ambitions and later success, triggering him to work hard and to gain a good business sense through working for his father.
Working in the quarry was a dangerous occupation. The constant blasting of the dynamite broke windows in the town of Clinton, and plumes of dust filled the community, thus just reinforced the anti-Irish sentiment that many of the locals held.
When the family business passed to Michael, he ran it in a more organized way than his father James. Times had changed. The economy of the region was changing to a cash-based system. Michael adopted the system that was different than the bartering that characterized his father's years.
There was still plenty of trading, but he was more likely to turn around and sell bartered goods for cash than to keep them for himself. Say he would receive a portion of beef as payment from one customer. Then he would divide that up and sell off a portion to other customers.
In the event of reselling those bartered goods, Michael would exchange them for cash without adding interest or profit on it in order to control his own cash flow. Michael ran his quarry business in triumph. Back in the old days, when his father was in charge, the quarry business in Clinton was already very competitive. There were 7 quarries lined up on the west side of the river. Besides that, there were 2 big players, John A. Young's quarry on the north side, and John T. Lee, the richest man in Clinton, whose quarry was on the south side. The price they charged the customers was relatively low, 10 cents per bushel. Somehow, Michael's father was able to charge 60% higher, which was 16 cents per bushel. It must have provided superior service and products to sustain such a significant price increase. When Michael was in charge, he had made the family business much more secure and strong.
At this time, James only owned the business operation, not the property of that business. In 1866, it was Michael who took the momentous step of buying the quarry property from George Gulick for the price of $5,900. This tells us that Michael understood the value of name recognition in business, which the Mulligans created by owning that property. You don't have to worry about the landlord deciding to terminate the contract.
The quarry business was very seasonal. Most of the sales of burnt lime took place in the spring and fall, when the farmers were preparing their soil for either summer's crops or winter's rest. To compensate for weakness, Michael expanded into other areas. He opened a new business of cutting and storing ice from the river, which he sold to locals in the summer. In 1875, the railroad was laying into Clinton, which gave Michael a great opportunity to supply gravel to the railroad builders. He then brought coal and sold it in Clinton. Because he received a discounted price on freight for his coal, this allowed him to keep the price lower than his competitors. At just 29 years old, he dominated the coal business. His triumph was not only defined by his immense wealth, but was also defined by his successful courtship of Mary Owens, who raised 11 children over the years. This romantic story began about a year before they decided to wed. Mary Owens was born an orphan child in Ireland on August 15, 1845. She was brought up by her grandmother in Swanlinbar in Fermanagh County, where she learned sewing and cooking. She was a Roman Catholic in nature and carried her little 2-inch statuette of St. Joseph with her since she was little. She had 2 sisters who were already in the United States when her doting uncle took her there around the age of 15. Like many young women at that time, she was introduced to work for Father Patrick Leonard, founder and builder of St. Michael's Church in Newark, whom at that time was the pastor for St. Anne's in Hampton Junction, 4 miles from Clinton.
Mary told the children that she was a housekeeper for Father Patrick Leonard. She used to take care of all of his clothes, cook for him, basically take care of everything that he needed. She also told him that she was from County Fermanagh, which was very far away from where Michael was from, of County Cavan, from the hometown of Belturbet.
Father Leonard covered all the expenses needed for her to attend the Academy of the Immaculate Heart in Reading, Pennsylvania, for about a year. She came back and continued working as a housekeeper. Meeting her future husband Michael was purely accidental. It just so happened that Michael regularly visited Father Leonard, as many Irish did. In the session, Father Leonard discovered that Michael had a unique personal quality and decided that he wanted Mary to sit and listen to their conversation, which was very unusual.
Michael Mulligan originally met Father Riordan when he was giving mass to some of the local Irish immigrants in town. Irish immigrants in those days usually had very little education based on the dire circumstances in their homeland. And that was in complete contrast to Michael, who was fortunate enough to come over to this country at the age of 3 and took advantage of all the schooling and education right here in Clinton. And that education and schooling really made Michael a standout amongst all the other Irish immigrants in town.
Mary was immediately attracted to Michael. When he came to visit, she began to dress up nicely in order to get his attention. It worked just as Mary had hoped. Michael began to like her too. When Father Leonard noticed that these two had developed an inseparable love, it angered him and her uncle. When Michael and Mary decided to marry, Leonard refused to perform the wedding ceremony.
It is possible that Father Leonard was so angry because he didn't want to lose her. For some reason, it was hard to find a good housekeeper like Mary. And, there's speculation that deep down inside, Leonard might have believed he owned her, and that they shared a special bond because they lived under the same roof together for quite a while. And after losing Mary, Father Leonard was not able to get over it for a number of years, but eventually the two of them did reconcile and become friends again.
On March 1st, 1870, Mary defied both her uncle and Father Leonard's wishes and married Michael Mulligan. The wedding ceremony was conducted by Father John Rogers at St. Peter's Church in New Brunswick. That same month, Michael bought a house on Center Street in Clinton, making his lifelong ambitions a reality.
Michael and his bride moved to Center Street in Clinton, the place of grand homes and the Protestant elite of the community. Their new home was directly in front of the main door of the Presbyterian Church, the main Protestant church in the community. Many of his Irish neighbors were worried that Michael had forgotten his Irish heritage. Later, he would show that that was indeed not the case.
Center Street became a home to Michael and Mary. There, Mary gave birth to 11 children. The young couple had raised a family and lived a prosperous life. Michael Mulligan, the son of Irish immigrants, maneuvered himself into a position in social Clinton. During his lifetime, he was a devoted son to his parents, a good brother, and an upstanding father to his children. He became one of the wealthiest businessmen in the area. He also served on the Clinton Town Council for many years and was appointed a grand juror in 1876. With his generosity and community spirit, he and fellow Clinton citizens John Grandin and B.V. Lee built the town hall and library. The Grandin Building, as it was called, was built on Main Street and is still standing to this day. For Michael Mulligan's contribution to the town of Clinton, the Clinton Democrat, a local newspaper, describes Michael Mulligan as a large but unpretentious gentleman who would rather let his works testify to his worth than any fulsome praise.